This edition of Mac Voices could have been sponsored by you. Mac Voices is always looking for sponsors who appreciate our high-signal, low-noise approach to tech topics with an Apple focus. Our sponsorship packages feature inclusion in all of the audio and video versions of Mac Voices at all of their distribution points, a web presence, inclusion in the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and more. Get the details by contacting me at chuck@macvoices.com or contact Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Welcome back to Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac Community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have a very festive Joe Kissell with us this time. Joe, I love the shirt. I love the shirt.
Thank you. I got this in Hawaii. I was in Hawaii, I guess about a year ago, last October. Did several user group presentations and spoke at the University of Hawaii for a day. And of course, I had to buy the uniform, you know.
Darn right.
Got a couple nice Aloha shirts, and it's hot here in San Diego today. So I thought,
yeah.
And also, as you know, because we were talking about this before the show, I've had a little bit of a stressful time talking to Apple today, so I needed something to, you know.
Yeah, when in Rome, right? Well, Joe, this time I guess we're going to talk about your newest endeavor, Take Control of Upgrading to Yosemite. This is the 1.0 version of this book. And as always, when you do these things, it's always interesting to me that you're writing these books and releasing a version of them before we even have the operating system, for that matter, or even have a date that the operating system will be out.
It is weird. I mean, we're selling this book about something that, for all I know, might not be out for a month and a half or more. Could be out next week, which... but anyway, we're in an odd position because, of course, I've been using the beta versions for a long time, and a lot of your viewers probably have been too, because, you know, we have this public beta that we talked about previously. So there's really nothing about Yosemite that's much of a secret. If it is, it's just because nobody bothered to mention it on a blog someplace. Nevertheless, I can't really, I mean, the letter of the law, the letter of the non-disclosure agreement is we're not allowed to say anything in a book or whatever that isn't already legitimately public knowledge. So even though I know exactly what you need to do from start to finish to upgrade to Yosemite today, I'm not allowed to tell you. And it's probably just as well, because it still is in beta testing, and things absolutely could and probably will change between now and the final release. So what we have done for the last several major releases is we've made two versions of the upgrading book. The first one is what we're talking about today, version 1.0, which is everything you need to do ahead of time to get ready, so that when Yosemite is released, whether it's next week or next month, you can hit the ground running, you download it, and you'll know all the stuff to do from there on in version 1.1 of the book that we'll release as a free update on that day. Of course, you know, I will be keeping up with all the betas, updating the book as I go, and as soon as I hear, you know, it's shipping, I will immediately download it, immediately install it on 2 or 3 Macs, and make sure that everything I've said is still true, because, you know, things can change at the last minute. Add a little couple last minute things like, and here is the actual link in the Mac App Store where you can download it from. Usually, it takes us a few hours, give or take, between when Apple releases a new version of OS X and when we have the final version of the book out. But it's going to take you a while to download it anyhow. And during that time, you can be backing up your Mac. You can be doing, you know, other productive things that are part of the upgrade process. So what we have shipping now is everything you do before, you know, clicking that download button, and it's a good bit of stuff, and it's a lot of useful information that we hope readers will get a lot out of.
Joe, the world has changed. And there used to be a time you had quite a bit of lead time, because when something went Goldmaster, then it had to be printed to the CDs, then the CDs had to be distributed to the stores. So you had a lot of lead time. Now, if Apple could theoretically make changes to the release version of the OS the 2 hours before they put it on the App Store. So
That's right.
You really have a whole different set of testing you have to go through, and in order to have the absolute current information out to readers.
Right. I mean, what usually happens is that at least a few days before the final public release, developers get a quote-unquote Goldmaster version. It has sometimes happened that even that seemingly final version isn't really final, and Apple slides a couple of little changes in, at the very last minute. And something that's as big and complicated as an entire operating system, it's really, it's challenging. It takes some time to download it, some time to install it, and a lot of time to check all the different things you might need to check. So chances are we'll miss something, because that just happens, and so maybe we'll have a version 1.1.1. We'll do the very best we can. We're only human, but we certainly don't have that luxury of waiting for CDs or DVDs to be pressed, not like the good old days. It's assumed that we'll be able to turn on a dime. So
yeah, who knew that was a luxury?
Yeah.
So, Joe, every time we do an upgrading to book, I kind of ask a lot of the same questions. And so, I'm going to ask them again. What is different about this upgrade to Yosemite? Anything, or are we still talking about some of the same basic advice?
Well, first of all, the fonts are totally different. You
mean of the book?
Well, no, the book uses the same font, but the actual installer, Yosemite, it's gone is Lucida Grande, and now it's Helvetica Neue or whatever it is. So the installer looks much different, in that the icons have all been redrawn. So there are less fiddly bits in the Safari icon, and they're all flatter and gradients, and so I'm kind of joking. But so the thing is, Apple has made the installer really good. The last few installers have been really, really good, and so they've been doing this long enough that they've kind of figured it out. They got it down to a science, and so from one upgrade to the next, very little has to change. Of course, a few things have changed. iCloud has new features, so of course the installer is gonna, or at least the post-install process is going to ask you about more things. Do you want to turn this on? Do you want to accept that? And a few little things have been moved to different places, or renamed, or been rearranged, stuff like that. But on the whole, the installer is very, very similar to the Mavericks installer, and the installation process is very, very similar. So, I say right in my introduction, if you've been through this a few times, if you've upgraded the last couple of versions of OS 10, if you keep good backups, if you are reasonably tech savvy, you really don't need to buy my book. Not that I wouldn't take your money. Of course I'll take your money, but you don't really need the book. This is in contrast to my book about beta testing, which is a book for risk takers. This is a book for people who are risk averse and who want to have everything spelled out, all the facts, what would happen if I did this? What would happen if I didn't do this? Are you sure that I really need to do that? I don't know what I need to do when I'm asked this question. What would the consequences be? So I try to spell all those things out. And a lot of it is an effort to address kind of unusual situations. There are some people out there, probably very few of them, but there do exist people who are still running Macs that shipped with a version of Tiger that are capable of running Yosemite, and some of those are going to decide it's finally time, I'm going to install Yosemite. Those people face some special challenges. People that are still running Leopard face not quite so many, but still some challenges. So if you are using older hardware, if you're using an older version of Mac OS X, if there's a whole long list of if this, if this, if this, then you might get into trouble if you just try to run the thing and you haven't prepared properly, or you don't know what you're getting yourself into. You might start up in Yosemite and go, what do you mean I can't run my PowerPC apps? Rosetta is gone? Well, yeah, that and a whole bunch of other things. So I think it's most valuable for people who are maybe a couple of versions of OS X behind. People who are already running Mavericks are going to have a largely trouble-free experience, which isn't to say there's not something valuable in the book. There's certainly useful advice, but I would say the older your Mac is, or older the version of OS X you're running, the more value you're going to get out of it.
There's one other thing that I think that you have to watch out for, and this may seem strange the way you and I talk and the things that we do, but I know there are a couple older utilities that I rely on, or I use heavily, perhaps is a better way to say it. And there's no guarantee that just because they're running okay under Mavericks, because they're no longer being updated, so they could easily break under Yosemite. And this is something I think a lot of people overlook until after they've made the leap, and then, oh boy.
Yeah, I have my Macs loaded up with all kinds of crap. Every imaginable utility and system enhancement. And that's why you need me to be writing this book, because if something is going to break, very good chance that it'll break for me, and then I can warn you about it. But one piece of advice I've always given is check all your software for updates before you install a new version of OS X. There is a site, Roaring Apps, where it's a wiki, so anybody can contribute, like this app does work under this OS or doesn't work under that, and so you can check it out, like if there's anything that you really rely on heavily, to see if there's a Yosemite compatible version. Of course, there will be more as time goes on, but use your various apps, check for updates, features, use the App Store, make sure that as much as possible you've installed the latest version of everything before you upgrade. In one of my test installations, I ran through the installer and I got this error message at the end that lists incompatible software that the installer is aware of. And one of the things, it pointed out to two things I actually had installed that I use on a pretty regular basis that were not compatible. One is GPG Mail, which is email encryption, and the other is Printopia. Now, as it turns out, the Printopia problem has already been solved. There's already a newer version of that. As far as I know, the version of GPG Mail that I'm running and the version of Yosemite that I'm running are still incompatible with each other. So I can live for a week or two without those things, but if I had any suspicion at all that maybe the developers weren't very actively working on updates, I would have to give some serious thought. Now, what am I going to do here? Am I going to find something to replace this? What can replace it? If not, do I really want to upgrade now? Do I want to wait? Do I want to not upgrade at all? I'd have to give that some serious thought. So it is a big deal, even for very modern things, which, as you say, work just fine under Mavericks. It's not a guarantee. Things can definitely break.
And you don't have to upgrade on the first day. It may be very useful for you to realize that program X that you use heavily isn't going to work because the programmers have abandoned it or the company is out of business. You need time to find a replacement. So, don't be super quick to upgrade, especially if you find yourself in that kind of scenario.
Let's take a walk through history. Do you remember about a year ago?
History is a year ago?
And way back in 2013 when Mavericks came out, and of course, I'm an early adopter. Of course, I'm going to install everything on day one, if not way before. One of the apps that I use very, very heavily every day turned out to have pretty bad problems in Mavericks, a little thing called Apple Mail. And there was a lot of, I mean, many articles were written, many comments were made, much rage was expressed by me and the general public about how just terribly Apple broke things in Mavericks Mail. And okay, there was a 10.9.1 update and a 10.9.2 update and another special, you know, just Apple Mail update. And over the next few months, most of the most serious problems were mostly addressed. You notice I'm hedging there a little bit, but Apple did eventually say, oh, I guess there was some problem there. I have a little more optimism about Yosemite because of the public beta, because in theory up to 1 million extra people are hammering on it, finding problems and reporting bugs. And I hope that if there are any major issues of the magnitude of Mail just isn't working with Gmail, that Apple will, you know, those alarms will go off and Apple will solve those things before they decide to ship the final version. So I'm more optimistic now, but of course things can and do change at the last minute. Of course there are no guarantees. So you might want to just keep an eye on Twitter, you know, keep an eye on your favorite Mac websites, Tidbits and iMore and, you know, all the rest of them, and see if there are any early reports about people having problems before you jump in.
I think that's a great strategy, you know, and I think obviously there are a couple other strategies. If you have a second Mac, then, you know, maybe move your current operating system over to that, and right. Then that could be a backup.
So behind me is an old MacBook Pro. This is one of the oldest devices that is still compatible with Yosemite, and there is absolutely nothing of value on this. The whole thing could explode in a puff of smoke, and I would lose no interesting data whatsoever. So this is my main test rig right now. I also am testing it on this Mac and this Mac, but this is the one that I know doesn't matter what happens to it. And so this is the one that I'm mainly using for testing Yosemite, and it would certainly be logical for this one to be the first one that I upgrade to the final version.
Joe, how about doing what we're talking about to an external hard drive and then being able to boot from that external hard drive? Is there anything in Yosemite that would prevent us from rebooting into Mavericks on the same machine if we had those kind of scenarios?
You can certainly do that. The trick with putting a new operating system on an external hard drive is you're going to be creating files, you're going to be changing stuff, and at a certain point you're going to realize, well, this has sort of become my main operating system, but it's now out of sync with my old one. So what do I do to get all the right files in the right place? Because I want to get this back onto my internal hard drive, but I don't want to overwrite any things that are there but not here. You know, so there are strategies to deal with that, such as using SuperDuper's sandbox feature, but it is certainly more work. What I would tend to do instead is make a clone of my hard drive, my internal drive or SSD, on an external hard drive. Test it, make sure it works, put it on a shelf someplace, keep it safe. Now go ahead and upgrade, because I know that if something blows up, I can always take the hard drive off the shelf and restore it and be back to where I was before. So you get essentially the same result, but with Yosemite actually running on your internal drive, with the hope that it'll be fine and you'll just be able to continue it. There have been a couple of things that I have noticed during beta testing that didn't seem to work right when Mavericks was being run from an external drive, that did seem to work when it was being run from an internal drive. Now, we're still in the beta process. We still have, I hope, weeks and weeks left. So I don't want to come out and say, well, this feature isn't going to work, and the reason it's not going to work is that it's running off an external hard drive. It could just be that, well, this is a beta thing, you know. And I haven't even done enough testing to be certain that that is the only variable involved in these things not working. But you never know. So I would certainly prefer to have my main operating system running on an internal drive, because just in general things work better that way.
I think you may have misspoken, but I want to be sure. You said that there's some things that seem to be working better in Mavericks on an internal. Did you mean?
Oh, sorry. You're right. I meant Yosemite.
Okay,
that's right.
I want to make sure.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah, I want to make sure people know the right thing and take away the right thing.
Sorry.
Okay, so we have the inimitable backup discussion, which I don't think we need to have again, because if you're not backing up, then, and Joe just said back up again if this is an issue. We have upgrading the software. Again, any other gotchas that you've discovered along the way?
So here's the thing, and again, it's weird, a little weird that as far as I know, Apple has published, here are the Macs that can run Yosemite. Apple has not published, that I know of, a separate list of here are the Macs that can use all of the features in Yosemite. And one of the things that I have discovered during the beta testing process is that there are some features that seem to require a newer Mac with Bluetooth 4.0, also known as Bluetooth Low Energy. So your iPhone already has this, your iPad already has this. If you have a Mac that was made in the last 2-3 years, it already has this. I only own one Mac that is new enough to have Bluetooth Low Energy. It's this Retina MacBook Pro that's sitting over here. Not that one, but this one. You can't see it, but trust me, there's one over here. And so there are certain features that I have only been able to test on this one device. When I try them on any of my other Macs, they just don't work at all. I even tried getting a third-party Bluetooth 4.0 adapter and plugging it into one of my other Macs, thinking, well, if that's all it needs, then I just plug in this adapter and it works, but that didn't work. Now, things could still change before the final version of Yosemite ships. Maybe it will support other Macs, maybe it'll support third-party adapters, I don't know. But there are certain things, mostly having to do with the interactions between Yosemite and iOS 8, that appear to require a Mac with Bluetooth 4.0. So if you are really excited about handoff, for example, and you are using a 4-year-old iMac, I would temper your enthusiasm. I don't know that it won't work or that it can't be made to work, but at this moment, the signs are not encouraging.
Okay. That's an interesting distinction, that it could run Yosemite, but maybe can't run all the features or take advantage of all the features of Yosemite.
Right. So it's hard to say anything definitively, because not only is Yosemite in beta, but so is iOS 8, and anything could still happen. But it's a little bit, it's weird. It's a little bit awkward, because on the one hand, this is the second time in a row that Apple has done the previously unprecedented thing of saying system requirements haven't changed at all. So Mavericks could run on all the same Macs that Mountain Lion could run on, and Yosemite can run on all the same Macs that Mavericks could run on. So it's now three OSs in a row that have exactly the same system requirements. That's really unusual, because usually older Macs drop off when a new OS comes out. So it was almost inevitable that something had to give. Yes, Yosemite can run, but maybe not every single feature. So,
Joe, do you think that's just a personal opinion? You think that's a good idea? You think it's a good idea to say, yeah, you can run Yosemite, but you can't use handoff. So you're really using Yosemite -1 or something,
Well, yeah, a little bit more than one. But anyway, yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I don't know how many total new features Yosemite is going to have, but there are a lot. There are bug fixes. There are really interesting, useful new capabilities that I can certainly get a lot of mileage out of, even if I don't have, even if I don't have an iOS 8 device at all. And certainly there are lots of people that don't use iOS devices, or people who use them but don't really need all the flashy new stuff, might not need those capabilities anyway. So from what I've seen, the features that might not work with older Macs aren't that big a deal. They aren't that serious. It's just curious to me that in none of Apple's publicity that I am aware of have they come out and said in so many words. Now, of course, this big flashy feature of Yosemite that we're making a big deal out of will require thus and such. So I don't know.
Yeah. So this is 1.0 version of the book. The 1.1 comes out as soon as you get your hot little hands on the actual release of Yosemite, and that is a free upgrade, of course.
Right, of course.
I'm sorry. I think you said this was about 70 pages. Is that correct?
So version 1.0, I think it's about 75 pages, somewhere around in there, and version 1.1 will be roughly twice as long. It's still being written as we speak, but there were some parts of I base every one of these on the version that came before, and there was lots of material in the Upgrading to Mavericks book that I was able to remove, partly because we have other better content on it. For example, I had a chapter on installing OS X Server, which is okay, but now we have an entire Take Control book on OS X Server, which is way better, way more detailed, and a far more useful resource than my pathetic little chapter. So now I just say, well, if that's what you want to do, go read this other book. I had a section on using File Vault, but now I have a whole book on File Vault, so that's a much better resource. So there have been some things like that, and of course, new material that I've added that wasn't pertinent before. There's a lot of stuff.
Okay, so and of course, I want to stress again, folks. Get the 1.0 if you have an interest in this at all, and have an interest in getting up and running with Yosemite easily, and let Joe take all the slings and arrows that he has. You get the book now, and then you get the free upgrade to when you may not feel you need it now, but you definitely will need it then. So grab it. Joe, what's the cost of this one?
Well, that's that's a little complicated. So one true-ish answer to that is that the cover price is $15, as befits a book that will eventually be somewhere in the 150 plus page range. However, almost nobody will actually pay $15. In fact, I would really urge you not to pay $15 for this book. If you pre-order it, that is, if you buy the 1.0 version of it from now until when Yosemite actually ships, then you'll pay only $10. So that's one way to get it for only 2/3 the price. But also, we're offering a discount to people who had the Mavericks version of the book. So if you should have already gotten an email from us about how to upgrade at a special low price. And in addition to that, we are offering a bundle that includes Upgrading to Yosemite, and excuse me, and 3 other Take Control books that we're calling them crash courses. It's a completely different format, which will be the topic of future discussions. One of them is mine on digital sharing all kinds of data with your Apple devices. And there's one by Shelley McFarland on Yosemite, basically the new stuff in Yosemite, and one by Josh Centers on the new stuff in iOS 8. So if you buy that bundle of all 4 books together, you will also save quite a bit of money off of the individual price. So I would prefer that no one actually pay the cover price for this book. And very few people will have to. The only people who will have to pay the full $15 are those who wait until after Yosemite ships and buy this book alone, not in a bundle. So don't do that. Buy it now and save money.
Okay. And I also think that, if you've been through these things, you probably know a lot of it, but just to be sure, I've been through things where I think back and I think, oh, I wish I'd have gone through the steps. I wish I'd have paid a little more attention. And by following along with the advice that you give, Joe, you're not going to miss anything that you should have done that can make your transition to the new OS a lot smoother and easier. So
there was an OS, I forget which one it was because I've been doing this for 11 years, but one of them I decided to keep a tally every time I installed that version of OS 10. I put a little mark on the board, and I think that one I installed like 40 some times. I have not kept count with Yosemite, but I mean, even as of today, and we're not even done yet, certainly more than a dozen times on multiple devices in multiple configurations, and upgrading from this and upgrading from that and upgrading in this method and that other method. So what I want to say about that is not just that I've installed it a lot of times, but that I've been surprised. In the course of installing Yosemite, I have occasionally seen, oh, I've never seen that before. That's unusual. I wonder what the effect of that will be. I wonder, why Apple made that change. And if I can be surprised, then you can too. So I'm hoping that what this book does is it eliminates surprise. I get to be the one surprised, and I get to figure out why is that thing happening, or what are the consequences of that thing, and I just tell you, so you don't have to worry or wonder or figure it out yourself.
Yeah, it's too bad, but we're not, as great as all this stuff is, we're still not to the point that everything is just bulletproof and rock solid smooth, no matter how great the quality control is on Apple's part or anyone else's part. So you really need things like this. You need someone like Joe who's gone through the process and noticed those things, and hasn't just blown them off, but notices them, tracks them down, and figures out what, if anything, they mean to you.
Yeah, computers are really complex, and as I have, as I constantly discover, I mean, before this call, I was on the phone with Apple for an hour, trying to chase down a really complicated problem, which, as close as I can figure, I don't actually know what happened, but as close as I can figure, there was a moment when someone had some service done on an iPhone, and a serial number got entered incorrectly, and that iPhone was put into my account, and my actual iPhone sort of was deemed to have been deactivated. And I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole story. It was anyway, but the point was, it had me scratching my head. It had at least 3 or 4 different people at Apple scratching their heads, and it might have been something as simple ultimately as somebody mistyped one character, but it had this sort of, that led to something else, which led to something else, which led to something else, and backtracking and figuring out who might have mistyped that thing and when to cause this problem is really, really tricky. So things, no matter how hard you try, things can go wrong. And because you're changing hundreds of thousands of files on your Mac when you upgrade, this is a time when, if something's going to go wrong, this is when it's going to go wrong. And so I do these books to hopefully keep you out of trouble.
There are days, and I know you have them, when it's you really think about this stuff and you think it's amazing that anything works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate those days, but they're there. They're there. So take control of upgrading to Yosemite. The 1.0 version is out now, folks. Go get it at takecontrolbooks.com. Get it now. Save money. Buy it in a bundle. Save money. But by all means, get it and follow Joe's advice, and your transition to Yosemite will be much, much smoother. Joe, as it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work on this, as always. And we'll talk to you again, I think, pretty soon.
Very soon.
Very soon. Very soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices, the talk of the Mac community. We will be back again with more soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.